Hey everybody, I'm Nick from Hawk Pro Detailing, and I have detailed for a murderer. If the allegations are true, Kouri Richins, one of my mobile detailing clients for years, poisoned her husband, Eric, with fentanyl. Now, this story has made national news, and honestly, I'm still trying to process it. I was like, do I do a podcast about this? But, I first met Eric and Kouri Richins, I think back in 2017, 2018, when I started a mobile detailing business. At the time, I was a TV news reporter and anchor for ABC4 in Salt Lake City, Utah, but I was in Heber City, Utah, where I was running my mobile detailing business. And I actually met Eric's mom at a Walmart one night buying some distilled water for detailing. And we got to chatting, and she gave me his number. She said he needs a detailer. And so I go out and I start detailing their Infinity and their truck every 3 weeks. I can show you an invoice receipt here to prove it. Eric and Kouri Richins, I think I charged them $70 for the maintenance detail on just the inside of both of them. They didn't care about the exterior. They had kids. Their vehicles were messy. It was pretty shocking. I actually have this photo here because Eric and I were tight. Like, I wouldn't say friends tight, but like very friendly. Like, he took care of me. He ran a small business, his masonry company. You can see this logo here on his shirt. Well, he gave me a hat, and I wore it in YouTube videos, as you can see here. I got separated in February of 2020 from my then wife, and the night it happened, I was talking to him about it, about how I was going through some troubles, and he really counseled me through this. And that was actually the first night I ever slept away from my house, because I texted my then ex and then wife, and I said, hey, I'm going to sleep in my detailing shop tonight. At the time, I had a small shop. I just had a lot going on, and I had some chemicals to sort out, and it was going to be a late night, right? I wouldn't get home till like 1 a.m. And sure enough, that started everything. But I just remember that night. I remember always appreciating him as a mobile detail client. And then when I got a business partner at Hawk Pro, I then stopped doing mobile, and that's when I stopped seeing him. But one other time, he had his truck ceramic coated by me. It was a red Ford truck, brand new. And all that being said, I cannot believe that I detailed for this family. And so I'm going to bring on a lifestyle host. Her name is Deena Manzanares. So she used to work at the same TV station I work at. So actually, I no longer work there. I used to work at the TV station that she now works at. She's a lifestyle host. I was on the news side. But recently, she had Kouri Richins on. Now, Kouri wrote a children's book about grieving the loss of Eric. So a father and a husband, and went on the lifestyle show on my former station, to talk about this book and promote this book. Well, currently, we think she was being investigated for the murder at that time. Very wild story. I have a weird tie to this horrible tragedy. So too does Deena Manzanares. Let's get to that interview right now. Okay, joining us now, lifestyle host with Good Things Utah, former colleague, really good friend, Deena Manzanares. Deena, we find ourselves at this really weird place where we both have unique stories about Kouri Richins.
Yeah, I mean, what are the odds? File this under things that do not happen every day. I can't believe you had a story. I've got a weird story. I'll jump right into it for you. So she emailed into Good Things Utah. And that's something that I want to be really clear that people understand, because some of this is we reach out, we book guests, and a lot of it is guests who write in. So she wrote in to ABC4 to be a guest on Good Things Utah. And she said she had a story to share about unexpectedly losing her husband and her children grieving, her grieving. She wrote a book so that they could help others who are grieving. So of course, that's the context we have. Our executive producer says, yes, we would love to bring you on the show. So this is like end of March. She gets booked for, I believe, April 6th. And this is the context that we have. Grieving mother, lost husband a year ago, coming on to promote her children's book. And as you know, a lifestyle show is very different than the news side. It's very different than any investigative journalism, right? We've got this little context, and we'll do a little bit of research to prepare. We might look up at Instagram, we might look at the website, but that's about as far as it goes. So we want to show our guests off in the best light possible. We want to be on their side. We try to put ourselves in their shoes. So the day she comes in, myself and my colleague Saray Chin sit down with her and we interview her about her story and about this children's book that she's written. She tells us in the interview that her husband, again, 1 year almost to the date, passed away. They don't know what happened. Totally shocking, very suddenly, and that she couldn't find a book to read to her children at night. She said nights are the hardest, and I wanted something to help bring them comfort. So we decided to all write this book together. So we go through her interview, it wraps. We have a few minutes afterwards where we sit and talk to her, and she told me after the interview that it was COVID. She said, well, he did have COVID and he did have a lung issue. So we think it was a COVID complication. So we chatted, talked to her for another maybe 5-6 minutes, and then she left. Didn't think anything of it. Well, the next morning we come in and an email has come into the station and it says, it's all anonymous. And it says in capital letters, you know, she killed her husband, and like a whole bunch of exclamation marks. And you know how that is too. You can get the occasional bizarre email that comes into the newsroom, and we didn't really think anything of it. About a week later, I get a DM on Facebook from a man that I don't know. We can't really see much with his profile, very private. And he says, you need to investigate the guest that you recently had on, the children's book author, because she is a suspect in her husband's murder. So then it seems a little weird, right? I screenshot that. I send that to producers. We start Googling, but nothing comes up. So again, kind of let it go, but it's in the back of our minds. And then the day comes where the newsroom says, hey, this is like coming down the pipeline right now. She's going to be arrested for her husband's murder.
Unreal. So there are a lot of reports out there already on this, but I've got you firsthand here. So what I'm sort of interested in is what it was like to be there with her that day. Like, even if your spidey senses didn't tell you anything day of, is there anything looking back that you can say, I mean, now that I know she's a suspect in a murder, this seemed odd?
I'm so glad that you are asking that, because that is like the biggest thing that I want to be able to tell people. So sitting down with her, I didn't think anything of it. I didn't have my spidey senses sounding any kind of an alarm. I didn't think anything was necessarily off. But I did clock that she wasn't super emotional. There was a little bit of warmth that seemed to be lacking. But I just thought, who am I to judge what her grieving process is? We all grieve differently, right? Maybe it's about a year. Maybe she's still a little bit on autopilot. Maybe she's still very numb to this. Or what if she had really gotten herself in the mental and emotional place that day to tell her story and to promote her book? I mean, who knows? So
yeah, you seemed more empathetic, almost to the point of like caution, where it seemed like you were overly emotionally sensitive to be like, hey, you know, however you want to talk about this, grief isn't linear. I could tell you were sort of like, hey, if this person lost her husband and she's grieving, like, I want to be as sensitive as I can. I read that in the way that you handled that interview, and she seemed like she might cry, but there was sort of a wall up emotional. I mean, it is just like, let's just analyze her behavior knowing what we know now, right? But
yeah. Well, thank you for saying that, because I do think that that was the approach that I was trying to take. I wanted to be very careful. And one of the things that I pride myself on the show is trying to make people feel very comfortable. And I thought this is a really hard thing to talk about. You could tell she was stumbling over her words. She wasn't super comfortable on camera. So I really wanted to put her, as I would any guest, at ease. So that was a big thing that I wanted to really let her feel. And I would have let any guest feel that we've got this, I'm on your side, I understand. Okay, so now fast forward, really having time for all of this to sink in. I've watched the interview back a couple of times now. And every time I think there's just another layer of, oh my goodness, especially as my own shock to all of it has kind of worn off.
Well, I mean, she reached out to you to be on a lifestyle show in the Salt Lake City television market. And I know where she lives because I mobile detailed for her every 3 weeks for years, right? And she's 25 minutes from where I live. So she's not close to Salt Lake. I mean, this is an hour plus drive, I'm guessing, for her to get to Salt Lake. So for her to reach out proactively, while at the time people are emailing you a couple days later or whatever and saying that she's a suspect, like she must have been investigated or being investigated at this time. Like to think the why behind her saying I want to be on your lifestyle show is very interesting. But continue on.
Yes. And I think that she was being investigated throughout, but that it was kept under wraps because when all of this broke, we got a copy of the search warrant. And as we started to read through and all the details come out, I mean, all the details that we now know that you can now, Google, it sounded like the police officer that was first on the scene when she called 911 saying, my husband is cold to the touch. I think he's dead. It sounds like he was suspicious from the beginning, but said this has to be, we need the element of surprise. Too many cases have gotten botched by, things being public. So I think she was being investigated, but we wouldn't have known, which makes sense. We did the Google search, couldn't find anything. So I think all along they were looking into this. I mean, we know now with what is public record, public knowledge, that he was poisoned by her. He alleges that she was, poisoning him the February the year before, a few years before that in Greece, telling family and friends she tried to kill me, saying, if anything happens to me, please investigate her. It was her. If I go missing, if something happens. So thinking now,
what year was that when he was telling family members that? I don't want to put you on the spot. The timeline might get a little jumbled, but I'm just curious. The last time I saw him was, it was winter of 2020. So it was February of 2020.
That was the last time that you saw him?
That was the last time that I saw him, and I mobile detailed for him in that garage. So when you see the photos of the house, there's the big house, and then there's the garage over to the right. And it was a big garage that didn't exist when I first started detailing for them, and that became his man cave. So there was one time when he had gone on a trip, and Kouri had told me that she was building out his man cave and getting all the wiring electrically and a top office for him with all of his game with the horns and everything on the wall. She was getting it all set up for him just right. Like he had all his toys in there and some work trucks because he had a very successful masonry company. So he had a bunch of kind of masonry stuff in there as well for work, but it was also sort of his very awesome like side garage. And anyway, so I remember being there with him in that garage. Interestingly enough, it was like the night, speaking of marital problems, which is, I want to be as sensitive as I can here, but it was the night where I had texted my then wife and I said, hey, I'm going to be late. I'm at the Richins house. I'm going to be late in Eric's garage here. I'm probably just going to sleep at my shop. And that was actually the first night I slept away and like slept in my detail shop at the time. And that was like the last night I'd ever slept at home. I didn't think it was going to be that, but Eric was counseling me, having had friends go through divorces in the past. I know he had gotten a divorce and just like, it's going to be all right, man. Like, and he gave me a fat tip that night, and he was so good to me. He gave me a hat, which I wore in some detail videos with his logo on it, which is so surreal. Like, they were very, like, when you detail for somebody, and you're in their car, and you see their messes or lack thereof, you see a lot of patterns in their life. Like, it's a very intimate thing. And I would go to their house very early in the morning, because I would go up to Francis Camus, I can't remember the exact, but I feel like I thought it was Francis, but I think it's Camus, right?
Camus.
Camus. And then I would mobile detail for them, and then I'd drive all the way into Salt Lake and work a night side shift, so 2 to 10:30 p.m. And I was on their schedule every 3 weeks. I did their 3-row Infinity, and then he always had some nice work trucks, and then he always had a bunch of workers for him who had like the more beat-up work trucks that were just kind of trashed. But he had a very successful, thriving business, but he was always good to me. He'd always call me boss. Hey, what's up, boss? And just...
Yeah.
But anyway, that last night I saw him, he gave me a fat tip, and then I moved shops, and he ended up paying us to do a ceramic coating on his new red Ford truck. And at that point, I had a business partner who was handling the phone at the time, and so I didn't interact a whole lot with Eric. I was kind of at a transition in my life, but I worked on his truck, so I'm like, this is an OG client, whatever. And we sent it, and apparently he was happy. And that would have been, gosh, I'm trying to figure out when that would have been, probably 2021 maybe, but it's just wild to think about this whole story.
It really is. And especially, I think, when you're going through something so personal and you're going to remember everything surrounding that time, the time of a big life transition, and he's a part of that time and that story and a really, turning point of a night and a phase in that next chapter
in my
for you.
own life. And
So
he counseled me like, it's going to be all right, man. Like, we just sat there in the garage and, just we were shooting the shit for like an hour. he genuinely cared. I mean, he had three boys. They would just be, I think, three boys, and
Yeah.
and they, he's just a good dude. Like they were just kind of free range kids, ATVs and running around outside. Um, I just always marveled at how he had such a successful business. I didn't know his story until I saw the obituary. Really, that I think he had been a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints, and so he had learned maybe his Spanish in Mexico at some point, because he would always speak Spanish to his guys. But he was such a chill, laid back guy. But like, it was very clear to me they were doing well, with
Yeah.
his masonry business, and he
Yeah.
always wanted to support me as a small entrepreneur.
It's so interesting though when something like this happens and it's local because you do find connections because of course you would. Somebody knows somebody, you have your story. And I did talk to somebody else who said they went to high school with him and had glowing things to say, and that's what it seems like we're reading about as people are speaking out about him. He was just a good dude and a good dad. So their kids now are 10, 9, and 6. But
Mm.
you mentioned how great his business was going. His business was thriving. He had multiple cars. They had the big, nice house. And so that's what people are saying now is that her motive, it looks like it was money. She had tried to change, or she did change his life insurance policy at one point. Then he found out, he changed it back. The day after he died is when she found out that she was actually cut out of his will. She had no idea. So she thought that she was going to be getting, I think it says 2.5 or 2.6 million dollars, but was left with nothing and didn't know that until the day after.
This is such a random story, but as I first started my mobile detailing business, Deena, I was in Walmart. Like I think after my night side shift at Channel 4, so it would have been like 11:30 p.m. at night, and I was trying to pick up gallons of distilled water because distilled water doesn't leave water spots. So I would use it in certain ways to like mix up chemicals or to use when I'm outside doing a wash in the sun without a hose. Anyway, and there's a woman there, and we just get to chatting, and I tell her I have a detailing business and I'm buying the distilled water for that, and she's like, "Oh, really? Well, my son could use a good detailer." So I actually met Eric's mom. She was working at Walmart at the time, um, working a night shift there, and she gave me his number, and I reached out, and that's how I sort of prospected that client. It didn't just like, how did this happen? I was doing my thing, and but just like salt of the earth, really good people. Like she would always be there watching the kids. You wonder how because she was a successful. I mean, I felt like she was always doing something. Was she a realtor, Kouri? Or
Yeah.
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 So she was gone a lot, and then he was obviously gone a lot, and so the mom there was watching the kids a lot of the time and getting them off to school. But I don't want to sit here and just talk about. I mean, I just want to honor Eric because he was such a good guy to me. But and you know what? She was totally fine to me too. It took a couple days for her to pay the invoices usually, but they would pay. They'd leave like a $20 tip. They
So
kept hiring me back.
what did you think about seeing her on her Good Things Utah interview, having met her before, maybe having a sense of her demeanor, herself as a person, as a wife or a mom? What did you think watching her?
She seemed pretty guarded. And I'll go from everything from her mannerisms to the jacket she was wearing. Like there wasn't a lot about her that she was exposing emotionally or physically. I felt like there was a wall up, and she was there, but she wasn't there. Like for me, like I having detailed for her a lot. Like I remember she was, very messy. Like her car was like a nightmare. To see it every 3 weeks and it to be this messy, just like about the messiest clients I'd ever had. But I say that out of love. Like
Yeah.
I'm messy. I have messy cars, whatever. But they were just perpetually just like a bomb went off in there. But there always seemed to be like a friendly energy around the house. But I don't think she was ever all that chatty, but seemed open and nice. But watching her on Good Things, I just feel like that Good Things Utah interview, she just felt very like bundled up physically with her clothing, guarded emotionally. It was sort of like, yeah, where was the emotion? I think is what I
Yeah.
thought when I watched it.
Yeah. I did notice that too with her all bundled up in her jacket. So,
Like, I mean, she was wearing a jacket indoors. I don't mean to critique someone's
yeah.
appearance or whatever, but again, we're looking at this because it is such a rare, shocking story where it's like, yeah, everything's going to get analyzed when you're accused of poisoning your husband.
It was an
Um,
interesting thing though. And I remember thinking that before we even did her interview, because normally, and again, same, like not going to judge what somebody feels comfortable in wearing, who cares? But it was out of the norm. Most people, I think when they come on to do their interview, they're polished, they're professional, you know, they take it very seriously. They're excited to be there. It's a part of it. And I noticed the way she was sitting, like her body language before she came over, she was hunched over. She was very small, like her energy
mm,
and her body language, very small. She was all bundled. Her hair wasn't quite done. And I didn't know that was our next guest. I thought she was just there supporting someone else because,
okay.
again, most of the time you come in very polished. So when I realized that was her, I was like, oh, I didn't even know. I would have talked to her sooner. So, you know, and then it was like, oh, come on over. And I thought it was really interesting that she never removed her jacket. Her mic was on, you know, her jacket. And that was just rare and something that I did notice.
Yeah, I
What do
noticed
you
it too. I did. It just because I know him so well. But like when I tell you the cars were messy, I mean it was like just like insanely messy. like gummies
and
on top of coffee on top of spills. Like every 3 weeks for it to have been a disaster detail is not telling that it's going to be a murder or whatever. But it was just something about her. So if
yeah,
maybe she was, her hair wasn't quite done for this appearance on Good Things Utah, maybe that's just she's a busy mom with 3 kids too.
right,
Um, I,
right. So
I
you
don't know.
fill in the
It's
blanks based on the
yeah,
context that you have.
yeah.
But I do really wonder, like, that's the big thing now is why did she come on the show? Why? Was it a cover up of sorts to say, look how sad I am, look what I did with my children? Putting herself in the spotlight seems so insane to me, but also did she think that was like the perfect way to deflect any attention because she wanted to portray that she was a grieving widow? I don't know what to make of it all for sure yet.
And I'm a pretty emotionally aware person. Like I maybe read into things too much, and so having been around them, not necessarily together, but the mom, Eric, Kouri, even the kids running around, like if I had to tell you, I'd say like there was love in this house. That's the thing is I didn't pick up on really weird vibes. Of course, when you're dealing with folks, it was like folks with money, but not folks like Park City money, right? It was a
Yeah.
little bit more country vibes, right? Like he liked to four-wheel hunt, be outside, right? Like I think they made a joke in his obituary about how he'd be dressed up in his Under Armour, whatever. Like that was more of his style. So it's like here he is, like a good down to earth dude who makes a lot of money, and so they have all the ATVs and the hunting toys and all the outdoor stuff going on. So I just felt like, yeah, they were a little messy, but like there was love in this house, right?
Yeah.
When she told me that she had set up the wiring in his kind of man cave garage so that when he got back it'd be a surprise, like that didn't seem like a conniving thing to do to ultimately get his money, right? I totally blows me away looking back. I mean, I got no red flags to throw at you other than how random is it that you and I had these interactions with Kouri Richins.
Yeah, it's just not something that happens every day. And so to think, you know, you were in their home, you met her multiple times, she was paying you. I sat and talked to her and then talked to her for another 5 minutes after and thought, oh, I feel so bad for her. And I liked her. And to think, I don't think I've ever met a murderer or an alleged murderer before.
And then ABC4 did a story recently where they showed this giant mansion in Midway that's under construction. Now, apparently that was a house that they had bought and she was trying to flip, which
Yes.
I
And
see this house driving every day. So it's not like you have to live in an exclusive neighborhood to see this house. It is along a busy road, but on a giant swath of land. So I'll try to either grab someone's photo off the internet or take some video later and put it over what I'm saying now. But is that allegedly the house where she allegedly got the fentanyl for the Michael Jackson dose
I
to then
don't
poison him?
know for sure if that was the house. I know that was
Okay.
the house that they had just closed on and they were fighting about it. And I didn't know because I'm not familiar with Midway like that, but I later read that that house is a thing. People are like, "What's this house?" It's everybody sees it. It's a
Been under
big deal.
construction forever. Yeah.
Yeah, so she did purchase it. They say that he was going to tell her he was no longer in. Like he didn't want to do the deal. He didn't want it to go through, but it did. So she was closing on it, I think, again, the day after his death and having a little family gathering celebration of sorts. That's when she found out that she was cut out of the will, and I think his sister told her. You can also read, it says there was some kind of an altercation when she found that out, but she still listed that mansion 2 weeks later for $5 million. She bought it for I want to say 2.5, and then put it up for sale for $5 million. So I don't know what's going to happen with it. That was the last that I read. There might be an update since, but that they didn't
Yeah.
know the status of what was going to happen.
This is just so wild. I mean, any other takeaways you have? I mean, we're not the ones who are breaking any, big developments on the. I think whatever you do, I'm not exactly sure. You may be more involved journalistically. I'm just standing back as someone who knew them. But obviously, you work at ABC4, where the journalists are working on stories. But I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts on this whole national news story and your involvement from the beginning of like? Did your involvement with this morning show, Good Things Utah, did that then cause things to start happening legally, or was it just coincidental timing?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think it was just coincidental timing. I really do. We did this interview with Dan Abrams, Dan Abrams Live News Nation. Again, it was me and Saray Chin that was in the interview with me. And one of the things he asked us was, "What's the status right now? Or are there any new pieces of evidence you can tell us?" And I was like, "Oh, we don't know anything ahead of time. I mean, we're learning along as things, become public and are in the media too. We're just all riveted. We're all fascinated. We're still talking about it." We did flip through her book because, she left some copies of the book.
Oh my
And that's
gosh.
another thing that is so surreal. On many pages is the illustration of him. And he's got angel wings. He's got a halo on some pages. And there's one child in the book, and she said it's
Mm,
like a compilation of the three boys. She goes, "He
mm,
looks like all three of my sons." And
mm.
so just to think, what was that process really like, talking about the dad's death and really working on this book? And was she totally detached the last year? Did she have regrets the last year? I don't know. I'm just riveted to see what happens next and to see what she might say. I'm dying to know. It's just really surreal. And I think just the big thing that I want people to know is that we didn't know when we booked her. That was a big question. Did we have any idea? No, we didn't. And also to say, I feel like I've got really good perception and
Mm.
gut instincts around people too. And I wish I could say that I felt something off or that I sensed something was wrong. And I really didn't. I really didn't. So it's just as shocking, I think, to all of us.
I guess there's a lot of elements to this story that I think are fascinating. For me, the personal connection is obviously why I'm probably as interested as I am. But you've got a very successful businessman with a lot of money, right? So there's this sort of outside looking in, like what does it mean to have all that money and for someone to want that, and then you've got the aesthetics of it, right? Like a beautiful woman, right? And like this happy looking family from the outside. So like you see the money and the beauty and the success, and you just wonder what goes on behind closed doors. And then there's that big mansion that we drive by every day that looks like on a swath of wilderness preserve. I mean, it's just gigantic. And that's a visual reminder. And then, of course, for me, having known them, it's a very, like, normally a lot of things don't kind of get to me like that or stick with me. But this one, for some reason, I'm thinking about it a lot.
Yeah, me
And
too.
as a father, it's like they got these three kids, which I hope we're not being insensitive about it when we talk about this. Like I know everyone's interested for a reason, so I don't feel like I'm
Yeah,
piling on. But
yeah.
those poor kids, man. It's
I know. I agree. I felt even when we were asked to do some interviews about this experience, I thought, I don't know, do I want to? I do, but I'm also very aware of her kids can see any of this, right?
yeah,
They can look up any interview, they can read anything in the press. And I can't imagine. I have my two little boys, and I keep thinking about them too, and thinking now they are probably, without both parents. If she is convicted, if she goes away, their lives are now, as of, the last year, forever changed, forever altered. This is going to send them on a whole new trajectory of their lives. And it sounds like they have great family, they're in great care, but it's really hard to wrap your head around. And, as a parent, you want to do everything to protect your kids and to give to your kids. And so much has now been taken from them. It's so sad.
Do you have any thoughts? Because you get a lot of guests on there, and I'm sure some of them pitch themselves. Others have a PR company if they're bigger to be on your show. It's free press, right? They want to be on TV, and then they can put that on their website and all these things. But do you feel like she was using you as a pawn, looking back, to try to make it seem like she really was the grieving mom? And look, she's got a legit book, and she's featured on this. Like, and if so, like, was that just a pretty average calculation for her under investigation to think that could actually work? A lot of this is a lot of hypothetical, right? But
yeah, I did start to feel that recently, as again, I've had a little more distance from it. Then I think I started to feel a little more protective of the way she used the show and used that platform. And I did kind of feel like we got duped, like we got played. She knew exactly what had happened, but she said to us, it was so unexpected. It took us by shock. And so to sit there, or to watch now us sitting there, her saying those things, knowing that she was lying to us, I don't know what was the purpose of any of that. I did go back and read her initial emails when she was writing to the show and then getting booked, and what she was saying to producers. And honestly, it does seem now that it seemed like she was more interested in the promotion of a book than sharing a message about grief. She talks about being very excited to promote, where you can link to the book. It was a lot about this book, and mentioned the message she wanted to share and to help others, but it seemed a little promotional heavy. So again, just interesting with all of that new context. But it's hard because you care about your job and your show, and you want to preserve that integrity. So the fact that it happened is, yeah, that's a tough thing to kind of reconcile and wrap my head and my heart around.
it's just like unlike anything you've ever had on before, right? What are you
Yeah.
gonna? Because you cover serious issues. Like I've seen you talking to authors who are going through very real emotional problems, and you
Yeah.
deal with them in an empathetic way. And then you also do more fun, lighthearted segments.
Yeah.
So when the tough stuff comes along and it's emotional, and someone's written a book about it, or they're doing some kind of event, you just kind of meet them where they are. Hopefully, like, why would somebody make this up? So I don't
Right.
think anyone
Right.
would blame you for having her on. Once they know the story, it makes way more sense. I don't think the fact that you said people are questioning like how all this happened. Do you feel like people think that you were involved somehow in getting her on there, and that you're responsible for promoting her book?
I don't know. I'm sure that's out there. I haven't heard that directly. I think that was a little bit of my fear at the beginning. And just when people would say, "Did you guys have any idea?" And it was like, "No, of course
Right.
not." So I don't know if that is something that people are feeling. We haven't gotten a lot of that. For the most part,
I
I
don't
think
think
the
so.
viewers know us and they've come to trust us, and they know now, watching it and reading everything, how shocking it is. And they've been really compassionate. They've been really caring. If you reached out, here and there every day, I think a few will reach out. And one even said, "Are you okay? Did you all need to speak to a counselor after?" And I didn't feel like that. I don't think any of our team has felt like that, but it's certainly something that we're talking about every day, that we're following closely every day, and just can't believe it. And we're all moms, so we all just talk about how that is so sad for the kids
Mm,
as well. Yeah.
yeah, it really is. Well, Deena, the most random, horrible tragedy that we both happen to be involved with in very unique ways. Thank you for coming on the podcast and talking about it.
Well, thanks for having me. And I think that it's just important to share kind of our side of it, our experience and our thoughts and feelings. And again, we're following all along and learning all of the new pieces of information right along with the public too.
All right. Thank you, Deena. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.